was a time when the news halls were bright with watchful eyes, a cipher we could trust, a steady lamp against the lights. Ink on the fingers, truth in the margins of the page, a watchdog silhouette pacing the corridors of power stage. Fourth estate, where did you go? From guardians of truth to echoes in the smoke. You once stood on your legs, now looking for steady ground. How do you rise again when the trust has fallen down?
Welcome to Emotional Algebra with Dr. E. I'm Andrew Tavani, your co-host.
And I'm Dr. E.
Dr. E, I feel like I should be saying welcome to 94 WYSP. We're listening to some rock and roll today.
Absolutely. Well, you know, these songs have grown on me in the ways to open up the theme of the podcast episode. So we did it with the Time Thief and some of the other episodes we've done. It just creates a little reality as well as kind of starts to tell the story that we want to tell through the episodes. So what'd you think of that one?
That's right. I mean, it has some very, very strong classic rock roots in it. You know, it just feels like classic rock. That's why I did that. Just reminds me of listening to the old classic rock stations. You know,
exactly. Had a little Dire Straits kind of feel to it. Maybe.
Yeah, I didn't get that initially, but the second time hearing it, I'm picking that up for sure. Yeah.
Yep.
Good.
So here we are back again, and we are here to talk about the Fourth Estate, the media, and and really dive into the effect that it's had on our lives. It's not to focus on an expose or anything. It's really just to discuss what are the trends and what have been the trends over the last 100 years. We can go back minimally that far, while the origin of the Fourth Estate actually went back to the times of nobility, the clergy, and the bourgeoisie, and then came the Fourth Estate. The Fourth Estate was really part of the checks and balances on those in power. And what we've seen is as the trust in the Fourth Estate, the media has waxed and waned over time, we can see that it's been very disrupted to our culture. It's been very disrupted to our being and to our stability. And hence, what do we have to stand on when those we trust to deliver our truth are even waning in what seems to be their ethics, their values, their drive for, it's a business. That's what we have to really understand is the media industry is a business and it's there to make a profit and at least has to break even. And in these times when we see such turmoil in what's come out to be sources that will call themselves media, yet don't necessarily hold themselves to the standards, and how that competes with the actual media and the loss of our newspapers, the loss of our news outlets, whether they be video, and then how that's transformed to other places on social media, online, on YouTube. I think it's really important to see this transition, and we really want to make sure we're holding this. And those who are wanting to step in the role and call themselves media, how can we hold them to a level of ethics, values, morals that the Fourth Estate is intended to be?
Yes, and also just looking at the emotions, the media can trigger strong emotions within people.
Right.
So
right.
I imagine that'll be some of the discussion today too, Dr. E, with quite a background there. You went into the origin of the term, the Fourth Estate, which probably a lot of people aren't aware of. I'm sure they've heard the term, but didn't know the history of it. But then you've got a little historical image behind you with the guy holding up a newspaper. So, and
believe it or not, again, that's Midjourney. So that is AI created.
AI, yes. AI song, AI background, huh?
Yep. And again, I think there's so much that's going into how AI is influencing our media. And you look at the accuracy of, I do research for the podcast using AI, search and I want to always make sure that it's as accurate as can be. So I'm careful about that too. And in leveraging AI, it helps me do my job to me better. It doesn't take over my job. Whereas just today in the media, Amazon announced 14,000 layoffs coming because of their integration that they're looking to do with AI, which again is going to become more and more common, unfortunately. A lot of fear out there with that.
Well, Dr. E, I will tell you what is not AI. Our guest today. We have a great guest to help us discuss all of this. His name is Jim Proeller. He is a longtime TV producer and media executive. He's had a career spanning a couple decades, not to date him several decades, not to date him too much, but long time with CNN. He's been with several other news networks. Currently is a producer for an international news organization. So let's just get him in here. Good friend of ours too, by the way, both of ours. Jim Proeller, welcome to Emotional Algebra with Dr. E. It's good to see you.
Good to see you guys. Very excited. It's an honor to be here.
I feel like you've been a major part of my media training and career, and I consider you my greatest mentor in this in what's become such an important part of my life.
We shouldn't start the podcast like this, where some tears are in my eyes, but that's very sweet and very kind. We support each other quite a lot in many different ways. So I appreciate our friendship, as I do with Andrew too, as well, because we have worked together too, and that was a great experience that I had with him.
Absolutely, yeah. So I actually talk about mentorship. Got a lot of mentorship from Jim, and just great journalist to work with. When we did work together, and I can confirm he is not AI. And they say in journalism, they say always get a second source. Even if your mother tells you she loves you, you'll get a second source. So Dr. E, you want to confirm that as a second source?
Absolutely. And one thing I always appreciate about Jim is I would send him pitches for things I wanted to basically put out there to CNN when I was doing a lot of work on there. And he always gave really incisive feedback. He didn't pull punches. He was looking for always that level of truth and integrity, and yet what is going to be that hook that's going to connect people to the story, that's going to move emotion. And I feel like one thing he's been good at is really maintaining that line between the hook that's going to bring interest and adding integrity to the story and making sure that it's reported honestly. And that's where, for me, when CNN in the early 2000s and mid 2000s really started to get slammed by people who I knew on social media, I'm like, you don't understand what goes on behind the scenes. You don't understand the row and how the row is out there doing research to fact check and making sure stories don't run without fact checking, without second sources, without corroboration. And that is such a critical part that people see what comes on the news. They don't talk about what goes on in the background and what is really making sure that the stories have truth and integrity to what they're sharing. Is there going to be a play on emotion? Absolutely. That's what draws people's eyes. And that's where we have to find that balance. So I guess a question for you, Jim, is you used to run the shot. I think you used to run calling the shots back in, I think you called it the war room at CNN back when you were, back long ago. How did that work? And how were you aware of telling the story, evoking emotion, and making sure that it stuck to its truth?
Well, I was part of a group that would discuss this, and I headed a number of departments, and I was responsible for their point of view. And we'd come to the table, as human beings and as journalists too, as well. We'd be able to discuss, and we had to make sure that we had a diverse group of people, diverse group of minds, people from different backgrounds, men, women, younger, older, etc., so that you had different thought all the way around. And then, the capability of being able to freely express what you felt at that moment, what you felt in regard to the integrity of the story, the sourcing on the story, the validity of that sourcing, and then discuss what's the impact of that. When it comes to the viewer, and then we'd have to take off our hat as a TV exec and be able to look at it from a viewer standpoint. And we all are viewers, right? even though we have different backgrounds and different experiences, and I may be in the media and somebody else may not, we still have, a viewer's component to ourselves. And so we look at it from that viewer standpoint, and we, there is an emotional connection that we always have to the story. We're human beings. We share that, right? We share that component. And that's so wonderful. So you're able to, as a human being / viewer, look at it and make some assessments, and then verbalize those assessments in a room. And then, that doesn't mean that's a final answer. That's why it's not one voice, it's many voices. Right? So you'd be able to hear different sides, and then be able to, almost as a group, in an organic fashion, be able to come up with a decision related to, that story, the focus, and the component of the story. And, the hook would mostly be, and, hook became, kind of overused and abused, like many words do when you use them too much in business or media or whatever. The hook is really the emotional connection. It's just, why does it matter to me as a human being? And, we'd be able to, almost without taking a vote, without doing anything else, we'd almost know when we came to that, like, yeah, that's it. We wouldn't have to say anything more. Almost everybody knew in that room. And then you'd go on and start to develop that story with the different components. Who are the reporters? What are they focusing on? What kind of technical support do you need? And then build out the story.
And Jim, would you say too that in your experience in the media, newsrooms tend to focus on stories that have a strong emotional hook to them?
Yes, because I think anytime we react like a whoa, a big smile, or an anger, all the different emotions, and our friend Dr. E knows a lot bit more about this than I ever will. I just have the emotions, right? He can define them and explain them a little bit more, right? And he scares me when he does, because then I realize a little bit more about myself than I need to, probably, or than I want to. I probably need to. Anyway, it's when it hits you, and you just are able to say, yeah, that's it. You feel it, and you sense it, and you recognize that others likely will feel maybe not the same exact things. They might be happy in something that you might be angry about, and be able to cheer that thing on, whatever that may be. But it is still an emotion, and a reaction to a story, to a component of the story that moves forward.
So did you ever find times in that room where you really had to pull back or shift, or felt like some of the decisions being made might have been almost getting placed across a line, or trying to evoke so much emotion that there were also checks and balances in that to make sure that, hey, this is going too far. This is on the edge of reporting versus evoking emotion.
Yeah. And I can think of a number of stories. I remember the early days when we were starting to cover Taliban at CNN, and, they were pushing people off of buildings with their hands tied behind their back. The individuals with the hands tied behind their back, and the Taliban were pushing them off the building. And some of us that were more conditioned in seeing this type of thing, we're saying, we've got to show that. That's important. We need to show that because it is happening. It is real. And there's some others that would say, that's more information and more visual information than we need to have. And that doesn't need to be a part of the story. Perhaps a portion of that, to be able to start to recognize that, yes, it does happen. And we do have pictures of that, but not necessarily the full component of that. And so we discussed that. And that's why I go back to, it's important to have different ages, genders, everything in the room, because everybody comes with a different perspective.
I remember doing a story with HLN, I believe. It was a daytime. I remember shooting it in my office, but it was after they beheaded that American and they sent that image, and news outlets were posting that video of them beheading him. And I said, once you do these things, you can't put the wrapper back on that. And I think that as agencies, it's really important that you are, in many ways, the media is like a parent that's fostering what their children are going to see. And if you look at then what happened in movies, remember in the Avengers and in the last Avengers, when I can't remember, after Infinity War, they beheaded Thanos and they showed his head roll across the floor. That had happened after they showed the beheadings. And I think we have to look at these moments in time when calls are made, whether it's a call that questions truth. We go back to Jane Pauley with the when she had apologized for the Dateline story about the truck explosion that they manufactured, about Chevy trucks that they pushed to sensationalize the story. And we can go back through time, through many, many stories. We have to look at how the media is basically fostering what we see, what then we start to believe, what emotions that we all of a sudden get used to, because all the things, even we've talked about school shootings, to me, it makes it more acceptable when it becomes part of our vernacular. And those are the things that I feel like have happened, and why people get more and more of a thirst for feeling excitement or feeling the awe or feeling the shock. And then it's not shock and awe anymore. It's not sensational. It's normal. And that to me is really unhealthy.
Yeah, it's a very important point. And it's something sometimes, when you're in journalism, when you're in television news and you have video, you have sound, and sound's such an important component to all this too as well, because you're hearing things and you have a sensory reaction to those. You have an emotional reaction to hearing things too, as well as seeing them. And so, that's why it's so important to take time and not do the rush of breaking news. You need to have this on. You need to have this on first. You need to really walk through the each piece of a video, listening, feeling, seeing, and identifying what it is you want to show to effectively tell the story. And that's a debate. You can't teach that in a journalism school by a paragraph in a journalism book, right? That comes with an understanding, with experience, and with allowing the components of a journalism and a components of a person to come together and form a decision maker.
Yeah, it's very case by case, and there's so much of the context matters too. One thing I want to ask you about, I think Dr. E brought up the beheadings, and I think you're talking about a period from about 2014 to 2016 where ISIS was doing that. Mm-hmm. And I think what newsrooms faced, one of the challenges newsrooms faced, and Jim, you tell me if this rings true to you, is that they would decide they would try to judge whether this was worth showing. It was shocking for sure, but they're trying to balance that with the viewers need to know. At the same time, these videos were going right onto social media. In fact, in some cases, ISIS was the one posting them on social media, and because they're so shocking, they end up trending and whatnot. So when they're already out there in some form on some media platform, I think that complicates a newsroom's decision and probably forces their hand to actually show them. Because otherwise, then it looks like they're hiding them, right? Exactly,
and we used an important word here before you guys did. Context. That's the key. In social media, often you don't have that. You might have a sensational component to a headline. An Instagram, a TikTok, a Facebook post, or at that time Twitter, and then there is the piece of media, the visuals, to go with it. And, it's important for a media organization, that's involved in good, effective journalism to go ahead and put that in context. here's what it is. Here's what we know about it. Here's who's involved. And that at that time too, with ISIS, the Islamic State, et cetera, not too many people have heard of those things before, other than, 9/11 and stuff like that. So, you still have to put reference in there. Who are these people? Where do they come from? What is their, motive?
Yeah.
And, what do we know about this specific facet of the group? And then, the whole situational understanding of what took place, as much as at the time. And then, full disclaimers too, as well, stating, this component, this video, this whatever it is, a still picture, will be disturbing to many, to some, whatever. And then allow a little bit of a firewall in the sense of a boundary that allows someone to make a decision on whether or not they want to go any further in understanding and going into this story.
Well, and curiosity is one of those emotions in there that draws us in to want to see. And I just feel like whether it's, I remember on the stories I used to do in a lot of the shootings and things, I would tell the anchors and some of the producers, say, I don't think you should be airing the people's names. And they started to make that call to not air the names. But then since so many other news outlets were doing that, I think there's that pressure to try to keep up. And I still feel like we have to look at, where does our integrity lie, and how much do we get into the truth? We can share details without names. We can tell about somebody was beheaded without having to show it. And I think that what has driven this in ways, yes, is competition of all these different media sources. 24-hour news, as that picked up in the 2000s, and you had the demand to keep up with those things as well. And I think that when we look at these things, a lot of people feel like, well, I want to make the call if I watch that or not. And I guess I wonder in some ways, is it in some ways incumbent on the media to really try to look out for what might be in the best interest of their viewers? And how do you balance that, like I said, without people feeling cheated about seeing something that they can watch on another network or another social media site? What is that like? Because I'm sure you still run into some of those issues with where you're working now.
Yeah, very much so. And it's a constant dialogue and discussion with those around you. And it's important to be open and vocalize what you're thinking and feeling, and then also listening to others and then making determinations. And I think as far as the viewer goes, the person that we're trying to engaging with, whether it be on a website, whether it be on social media, whether it be on the television platform, it's important to, I feel, be transparent, to let everybody know how you came to this decision of showing this, how you got this information, what kind of information is still left to be found that you don't know about. One thing that bothers me so often when we go to, when we being, the television news, go to, breaking news stories, and quite often, tell us what you know, Joe. And then Joe stands there and says, right now I'm at the scene and we're not sure, we don't understand yet, where the car came from, who the person was. It could have been that he or she has done X, Y, and Z. And they start to speculate and start to bring in all these what ifs. And really, that to me is irresponsible. If you have a piece of information that's important to convey to an audience, great, give it to them. Don't stand there and say, go through all the possibilities of, what ifs, when they really, are so far fetched and might lead you as a network or as a television organization, as a news organization, they might lead you down the wrong road, which you don't want to go down.
I think, Jim, what you just said there reminded me of, and to go back to an early 90s example, reminded me of, if you remember during the O.J. Simpson, the initial O.J. Simpson coverage. So after the car chase and after he was back at his Brentwood home, I was watching live ABC News coverage with Peter Jennings. Had called in. It was at a strange time, not his usual time to be on, and they got a call from somebody who claimed to be across the street. Do you remember this? Do you guys remember this?
Yes.
And he's claiming to be able to see what OJ is doing in his house, and then he ends it with "and Baba Booey to you all," and it was a Howard Stern. It was a prank call from a Howard Stern fan. That illustrates the point right there. Like ABC News at that point was so hungry, and there was tremendous competition to be out in front of that story, and they got burned in that case. And to your point, Jim, that can backfire, or it can be useless. I think kind of like what you were describing, or it can really like blow up in your face. Also, want to go back to something, Doctor. Go ahead. Do you have something on that point?
I think that was a time too that CNN was coming of age. Although they started in 1980, yes. They were still getting more and more exposure and growing. With their coverage, with good strong reporting, good strong in-house people, producers and writers who and researchers that are working behind the scenes. And at that time, with ABC, CBS, and NBC as the main networks, they had a component that were taking care of their evening news, and they had very little outside of that. Everything funneled into their evening news components, and their early morning shows and stuff. But so to have a full staff available at CNN at that time, doing the due diligence behind the scenes. And that doesn't mean that CNN didn't do anything wrong, but the capability of having a good, knowledgeable, experienced staff in support of what is out front and being seen on the air allows you to mitigate, and reduce those mistakes much more.
Yeah. Now, just to go back, Dr. E, you were talking about the media having a responsibility to sort of protect the viewer, I think is what you're saying, from some of these really disturbing images that can happen out there, like the beheadings, let's say. And I think that, and Jim, I want you to weigh in on this too, but I think in my own experience, one thing we always weighed in was, tried to weigh was whether it was something so sensational that if you didn't see it, you might not believe it. And are we trying to, yes, this is going to be shocking, and yes, it's going to be disturbing, but do people need to see it? Because it's so, like those beheadings at the time, that was a new tactic for some of these terrorists to not only behead somebody, but to do it on video and then push the video out worldwide. And granted, that tactic was abetted by the emerging social media platforms. So I know that when we would decide those things, or even something like the Boston Marathon bombing, deciding how graphic to go with the images of the aftermath, we tried to weigh that against just a need to be able to prove that this actually happened. And Jim, what's your experience with that?
Yeah, and you certainly want to give a sense of what really took place. How horrific the situation, or how beautiful the situation is.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
Without being gratuitous and constantly. I know it when I was at CNN. It's if we had an image and we were having live shots, we were having teases, we were having situations. We would be able to show it, identify it with context, but also not overuse it, not continuously replay it over and over and over again ad nauseum. That sickens the audience, and it also reduces their ability to understand the image, because they're building up a callousness towards it. They're becoming desensitized to it, and so context again, and then not overusing the images, and then being judicious in looking at the situation, knowing, hey, this took place. This image, this video, this soundbite helps tell the story effectively. It really, fully allows you to feel, experience the situation in a way you can't. That's what journalism does. It brings you the story, without hitting you over the head with it multiple times, being in your face with it, stating this is wrong, this is this is incredibly scary, and being sensational with it is not what we should be doing as journalists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think one thing to reference what you guys have been talking about with what you show is, I think when we look back to the Vietnam War so long ago, that was one of the first wars that was really televised, and they brought a lot of tough things for people to see home. That I think you're right, and your reference, Andrew, really did bring the reality of war to people and help them to see it, and probably contributed to some of the ending of that war, because people were so shocked, and the government couldn't necessarily keep all that tidy and secret. I think that when you go back to World War II, they'd show the troops marching in and all these feel good fun times, and they didn't show the troops that were losing limbs and legs and friends and all the horrors of war back then. So I do see the balance in that, and I that's where I think it's something that, even if they had someone on a shot team, it's picking the shots in that room, from a who really understands psychology and understands the potential implications to viewers, because we know how many kids are in the room when parents are watching news and or on their iPads or things, and the kids are interested and they catch these things. That does make an impression on those kids, and it makes an impression on, like I said, what they feel becomes more acceptable, and what becomes part of, like I said, just their vernacular in how they see the world, and does the world feel safe, and then the emotions that they then feel like they have to cover up, because, well, this is normal. I shouldn't feel scared, or I shouldn't have these nightmares. I shouldn't have this. So then we start to suppress those emotions as adults, teens, kids, children. And I think that's really what I think is an important piece to look at throughout this. And social media, to me, has just eroded all that away, because so many people who want to be part of the media, the kind of the media wannabes, who are just doing what they're doing to me for clicks and for the end game of seeing, can I get a sponsor? Can I make some money off this? So that's what I feel also has happened, like I said, in some of the mainstream media things. That is a slippery slope, a very slippery slope.
I think to Jim's point earlier, and I think with the at least the medium of television, warning the audience for sure. I know I've got kids and we've come up against that, where sometimes felt like the anchors didn't give a sufficient warning as to what was coming to be able to like cover the kids' eyes, so to speak, or whatever. But I think that's important. Do that, right? Like, I think viewers have especially adult viewers have the right, and maybe even the necessity, to see some of these images or hear some of these gruesome details. But you certainly don't, an adult has a fully formed brain, whereas a child doesn't.
I don't know, man. I don't know, man.
I'm not speaking for myself, Doctor. I'm speaking for you, Paul.
Bring up an important point in regard to the warning of a graphic image, and so often we see now, it's like the green light going to the red light, and there's no caution in between.
Yes,
it's reading the copy and then saying, and we advise you that these images can be graphic, right?
Yeah. I know.
When that sentence can be put at the front end of your copy before you get into the story, you can say, in a minute, we're going to show you, or we're going to allow you to see, what took place, and we want to say that this could be, offensive or graphic to some, because they are disturbing images. But yesterday, this happened, X, Y, and Z, and then get into the story, and then you can say it again, and a reminder that these are graphic images.
Right. So you're saying bookend the in between, before the image, with fair warning, 2 fair warnings, right? Yeah. So people have a chance to switch or do whatever they need to do.
Put a caution light in there,
Yeah, exactly. So now here's an interesting thing that I found. Now, most of my experience is in digital journalism, not television, Jim. So one thing that we had found is that when, obviously, like, and I'm talking about going back to, let's say, the Boston Marathon bombing, or there was a time when we went through a spate of really, really bad school shootings, like Sandy Hook and the Aurora movie theater shooting, Dark Knight shooting, and so forth. When we would we would post a story on the website, and then it would click through to another story where you're going to get the full, the full story and the photos and the videos, whatever. And we would put a warning on that. The warning would serve as almost a greater invitation to click, because people are like, oh my God, in their morbid curiosity, they're like, oh my God, there's a warning on this. I've got to see it now. So we would see and when you're with online tools, you can measure every little click that's made, and you can see exactly what they're clicking on. And it's the link with the warrant that contains the warning language that people are going nuts clicking on. So
at least that's a choice, though, right? They still have a choice.
They do. Yes.
You've given them, and I feel that even a second line, warning, this is graphic, graphic because of whatever, and
yes. And we would do that. And I should say, like, I'm talking about, story promotion on a homepage that clicks through to a story, yes, the full story on a different page. And we'd have the warning on the homepage, and then you get another warning before you even scroll down to the body of the story. So yes, we were doing 2 warnings, but we found, but you're right, at least, and that was how we thought of it. We thought at least we were warning the audience, and they're making their own choice in that matter.
I wish we spent more time, and that's again why we're doing the show, and really educating people on what are the effects of these factors emotionally, in belief systems and attitudes that are created from those experiences. And that's where people really have a hard time really wanting to look at things that they might have to look at themselves, like you commented on earlier too, Jim, in that situation. That how do we really understand what contributes to our conscious, our unconscious, our beliefs, our attitudes, our perceptions? And to come back to your comment, Andrew, about fully developed brains, is brains fully developed, but it's kind of like video games, where you might have 5 or 4% of a population that plays a video game that might be very adversely affected by what they do or what they play in that video game, to derealize that experience that might feed an underlying psychological condition. The same thing goes with what we see in the news. And sometimes it's those small segments of the population that really put us at risk, because in essence, we made choices that put them at psychological risk for where that might take their emotions, their beliefs, their fears, their potentially developing delusional and or psychotic behavior. That are we responsible for everyone? I think we can say no. And yet at the same time, I think in ways, yes, we are, because we're all in this together. And I think we want to be able to assume a responsibility. And that's where even in the headlines that are used on my shorts, I have guided my team: do not use sensational headlines. Do not say things that would be too evocative, because I don't want to be part of that, of the situation where people start to mistrust the integrity of those who create sensational headlines. I see them all the time on my social media feed, or what comes up on my phone now. And I'm like, I'm more discouraged from watching that, because A, I don't want to endorse that behavior. And B, I know when I get there, I'm going to read the story and go, that wasn't what they said. So we have to realize, what are we marketing and selling when people question the headline? They question the teaser. They question the social media ad that draws you to that. And that's what's happening to me, that's feeding an epidemic of mistrust that our culture is so mired in these days. And I think, again, we all share responsibility for it. Whereas I think we have to look at the media and what did they do to foster, as well as those in politics who wanted to peddle their side of the story, and those who had power over people with their wealth to be able to manipulate stories, to those who want to buy the media outlets to steer the story and direct the news. Those are all factors we have to look at and realize are being played out every day. Ability to me to choose our role in what we endorse or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing you're talking about there is clickbait, which is, we dealt with that. In some of my jobs, big jobs, like we would weigh that too. Is this clickbait? Are we over teasing somebody? Are they going to be disappointed when they click through to the actual story. So those conversations, just like Jim was talking about, those conversations happen and they get run through, numerous people sometimes before they go live, and sometimes you don't always do it as perfect as a job as you might hope to do. But I think most of the time you're trying.
And I think it's important too to assess, as you go along, right? The decision you make right now doesn't necessarily mean that 15 minutes, an hour, a day from now, it's the same decision. You might realize that something, needs adjustment. It needs a total 180 maybe, for whatever reason. And I think when media organizations, news organizations, true news organizations do that, they become more transparent about recognizing, sometimes mistakes are made, or it may not even be a mistake, per se. It may be, just a different way in evolution of the story that's necessary to take place. A change in the headline, a change in copy, a change in the visuals, whatever it may be. It's important to evolve and recognize that what I say now and what we do now is not necessarily what needs to stay that way.
That's a great point, Jim. Yeah.
So what do you feel from your observation over the last 30 some years, Jim? Do you feel the influence of social media has been on news organizations reporting, evolution of those organizations, and both positive and maybe, negative or detrimental?
Well, the first things that it does is bring us awareness of the story, right? That something's happening somewhere. But we've got to recognize that when we see that, we have to verify that. It doesn't mean that if somebody says this happened and, and this is the situation, that is absolutely true. But it allows you a point to say, okay, something, someone did say, or some group did say, this took place, or is taking place, or is underway. And then you go ahead and you put resources in place to go ahead and identify what's happening. Is it worthwhile to cover? How do you need to cover it? And then most importantly, when do you need to bring it to your audience? And that's an important point. And I think it goes back to transparency too, as well, to be able to say, if we're on a live news broadcast, or even on a website, or even on a news organization, social media, to be able to say there are reports of this happening. We are monitoring it, and we will bring you updates as soon as we know more. That also puts you in a position where now your audience, is going to be aware that something's happening, and they're going to start to look elsewhere too, as well.
Exactly.
And so you run that risk, but you have to trust in your resources, in the people that you work with, the team of reporters, the team of producers and writers, and assignment desk, to start to identify the important components of the story that you want to bring forth to the audience, and do so in an appropriate manner, to be able to constantly update, and give what but without speculating, without leading someone in the wrong direction, and be able to, and same way on the broadcast, to say, to look straight in the camera and say, this is what we know, and to state it as such. This is what we know, and we are looking into it more to find out X, Y, and Z, because usually the X, Y, and Z, which is the who, what, and where, are usually, the basics of journalism, and why later on. Those questions are the same thing that the audience is asking. So they want to know more, but they don't want to be led in a direction that, you have to retract from, or go a total, right or left turn, in a different direction from where you're going with the information that you have. And too often, media organizations, news organizations are too quick to put up information, without seeing, thinking, verifying, and then sharing.
So do you feel like there's been an erosion of seeking truth versus getting information out there in the race to be the first to break it?
Yeah, the speed game is something that kills us all, and that's why you have to have some cooler heads and as part of your team to be able to say, okay, let's see what we have here and start to question it immediately instead of just be a conveyor belt for information. You don't want to do that because that information, first of all, even whether it's a press person or someone speaking on behalf of whatever the situation is, doesn't necessarily mean that what they're saying is accurate in relation to what is happening. So you have to have minds, reporters, producers that are sitting there, saying, okay, I hear what he or she just said. How can we verify that? But that doesn't mean you can't share it and say, press spokesperson for this person said this in relation to the story. We're looking into it more to ensure, that we have the right information.
Yeah, I would say also, along with that, a lot of times when somebody may be saying something that's fully accurate, fully truthful, but why are they saying it? They have a motive, A lot of times sources want to keep a lid on a story or whatever, but until they decide they want to not do that anymore. So I think that's where the media can really help by adding that context. Like, why is this person telling us these things now? And that's an important thing to remember. And I think that gets into the speed game too. That takes time to try to contextualize that or verify it or talk to another source about who may be being mentioned by that individual and so forth. Yeah.
So Andrew found a Gallup poll on the level of trust that Americans have in the media. And why don't you share some of that information that you found in that and how it's waxed and waned over time?
Yeah, so this poll was released just at the beginning of October 2025. It found that Americans' trust in the mass media reached a new low of 28% in the U.S. And that's lower than it's ever been. And to go back, it looks like they started doing this polling in 1972. When they first did it, it was at 68%. So you're talking about, almost triple, not quite almost triple, but close to, almost more than double what it is today. And it actually reached a height of 72% trust in the media. And then that is, according to the poll, people who have a great deal or at least a fair amount of trust in the media. That was at 72% in 1976. And then after 1976, it's steadily gone down over time with a few ups and downs throughout the years, but generally has trended down until last year they did it. It was at 31%. This year it hit 28%. So I guess question to both of you, why is it eroded so dramatically in 50 plus years?
After you, Jim.
I can only speculate a little bit, but back in the Walter Cronkite era, you had a father figure, whether it was Cronkite or the other networks that came on, and this is coming out of the Leave It to Beaver era, right? Everybody was a family, strong family unit. Father figure was a strong. The patriarch and everybody kind of revolved around him. And then, so they revolved and sat around and watched Walter Cronkite say the things he did and react the way he did, which was amazing. And you heard the news, but then, things like we talked about Vietnam, came about, and you saw more and more things. And then you saw some propaganda and some counter information that went around what was actually coming out of Vietnam, because you had the Lyndon Johnson and others very concerned about the people seeing what was taking place, and then getting into later on with Watergate, Iran-Contra, Chadgate, if you will, and then sensational news programs like
TMZ,
Inside Edition, and Current Affair and stuff like that, which was, always like this, and the cooler, the more insightful the headline was, and and the fast pacedness of it,
heavily stylized,
brought everything into a different playing field. And then the internet, of course, and now you have this wide open playing field of information that, first you had a number of sources that were mostly trustworthy, and during that time, and now you have all this. And then you had, of course, the George Floyd era, the Black Lives Matter, cancel culture came about. And so all these different reactions to everything taking place. And I can't, as Dr. E could, I'm sure, talk about how all that, chaos or confusion, and then not to mention, the COVID era too, as well, when you had, difference of opinions popping up and combating each other. And then, so many social media sites with different pieces of information. So you have all this, and after a while, you just say, I don't trust anything, and then, most people started to just live in an echo chamber too, of getting information back, to them that they were putting out there, because that's the algorithms are feeding them what they feel or what it feels that they want to hear. Mm-hmm. And then the person isn't, in my opinion, the person isn't going out to source their news effectively when they think about a story and they want to do more research on it. They're just looking at the first thing that pops up instead of, several different news organizations and what the information is, and then bringing together their own analysis and understanding of what took place rather than just going to one source.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As you describe that, Jim, I mean, you're talking about these quaint times of 3 news networks, nightly news broadcast each night. And now you've got the 20, I mean, at some point, I guess the mid to late 80s, early 90s, you've got the 24/7 news cycle begins with, I think cable news really ushered that in. Mm-hmm. And then everything you described with social media sort of just exploding all of that in recent years is kind of, that is part of the contribution for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think if we go to the emotional side of all this now, this is a lot of emotional algebra in this. We have a lot of variables. And this is where I think to go back to, I think it was Dick Cheney, we have our known knowns, our known unknowns, our unknown knowns, and our unknown unknowns. And I think in that there's so many unknown variables that people don't see in why they're presented, what they're presented, how it's presented, all the different motivations that people have to put out there what they put out there, whether it's a news organization, a credible one, and or one that isn't credible at all, or one that's posing as one that's supposed to be credible, that is purposely putting out disinformation. And you're right, people want to feel like they're right. People want to feel like what they believe in is good, and people want to see themselves as strong. So we're getting back to those dichotomies: good, wrong, good, bad, right, wrong, strong, weak, win, lose. And they want to be seen as winners. So what we align ourselves in, we want to see as winners. And if we come up along information that we don't agree with, or that is, we believed in something inaccurate, well, we're going to try to diminish that, because if we were wrong, we experience failure. We might feel stupid. We might feel betrayed by the source or by the individuals that sold us that information that we bought, hook, line, and sinker. So we have to look at what we're doing in essence is we're trying to just shore up our own egos, and often our own fragile egos. We got to own that. So many people feel like we have to look like we're on top of it and we know everything and we're right. And in that, we have these arguments that are not about understanding anymore. It's about, I'm going to use my truth and what I was told as saying, no, that makes me better than you. That makes me more right than you. And this is really part of what we all want to learn to own as individuals in these media equations, and being responsible in part for contributing to the demise of the fourth estate. If we lose the ability to truly find trustworthy news sources that are absolutely seeking truth, it can absolutely continue to devolve into some kind of chaos, because we will give people the ability to manipulate us. And when things go wrong, or we find out, well, they did it to me. No, we are not victims. We are not victims in this. We are participants in this situation right now. We're participants in social media. We're participants in propagating what's out there these days that we have to believe, yeah, that doesn't sound right. Or this person's behavior, if you add up their behavior over time and you look at it accurately, yeah, it doesn't seem right that all of a sudden they'd switch allegiance or switch their behaviors. Behavior remains pretty stable over time. So we want to not only look at what the breaking headline is, we want to look at the news. And one of the things I used to bring up to my daughter, Jim, is that I would say she would report news to us or things that she saw on social media. And I would say, what are your sources? And she'd be like, what? Well, this is my source. And no, when you share something with us, I want to know what your source is. And I want you to have at least 2 sources. And as she's become probably a year or 2 after that, she'd say something, go, what's your source, Grace? Because I'd be doubting it. And she'd go, well, I read it here and I read it here. Let me show you that. And I'd say, you know what? I'm sorry I felt doubt because my history with you kind of had me doubting what you were saying was true. And thank you for showing me this. And more importantly, thank you for taking the guidance to verify before you report. So what you were talking about being able to take the time to step back and verify was such great input that you taught me that. And you helped me to have that, ensure my integrity, especially when I would talk in the news and share things that would affect people's emotions. Because my motto was always bring calm to the chaos and always be aware to manage my own brand and my own integrity. And Andrew and I have had several discussions and had a Wendy Garisco on here, who you know from CNN. We've had her on to talk about personal branding and how to develop that. So that is so critical. And I think we each have to look at what is our personal brand and how is that affecting the people around us, and I'll finish that with, and that's the way it is from Walter Cronkite, to those who might not know that. So that's kind of where I see the state of things, and understanding our emotions is so critical to understanding why things seem so chaotic these days.
Interesting conversation from both of you. Jim, thanks for being here today. Your insights are invaluable. Really,
absolutely.
I think as Dr. E just described there. So it's great to having you on.
And you are a part of history. It's a very powerful history that time. Always remember that you help steer the history that we see and know and has become a part of who we are. And the way you presented it to me and knowing you all the years I've known you was always with seeking truth, honor, and integrity. And I thank you for that.
Well, I'm touched by your words to both of you, and I appreciate the conversation. And these are the kind of conversations that everybody should be having and everybody should be listening to. And I think if we all listen a little bit more to each other, we'll be better off.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us, and until next time.
Bending many a story told. You traded nuance for speed, we traded doubt for emotional grip. Broadcast became performances on a script we wouldn't flip. Billionaires, power players, politicians with a smile whittled away the gate that stood for more than a and all our legs are gone. When trusted voices falter and the untruths have won, will we ask harder questions about louder lies? Will we own our part in the fading of the who and how and why? Fourth estate, where did you go? From guardians of truth to echoes in the smoke. Now looking for steady ground. dark heal. Investigations that seek truth with headlines that are real. Revive a chorus of diverse voices, accountability in view. A newsroom that remembers who it serves and who it's for too. If the press can be a mirror or a weapon in disguise, let honesty be the blade that cuts through all the lies. We'll all own our complicity, the blind spots of bias in our eyes, and rise with transparency to finally ask what is true and why. We'll reclaim the craft, verify, corroborate, and show that we care. Raise the standard higher than the noise around the square. Grant readers the maps, publish the truth of the who, the how, the why. Let trust breathe again beneath the government of the people, not the slide. Fourth estate, where did you go? From guardians of truth to echoes in the smoke. You can stand on new legs though the ground is rough and worn. Should you rise again, let honesty be reborn. Where do we go from here but forward, hand in hand? We'll ask the hard questions, we'll all take a stand. If we rebuild trust, it starts with me and you, with questions, accountability, and a newsroom that's true.